Before we get into it with Caleb Sisk, we want to remind you the program is brought to you by Derek Daniel State Farm Insurance. You can call Derek for all of your insurance needs at 205-758-3391. Like a good neighbor, Derek Daniel is there. You can call all his buddies. He's got Bobby, Lane, and Red upstairs right now waiting to take your phone call, give you an auto insurance quote, home, life, auto insurance quote. All your insurance needs can be met by Derek Daniel State Farm Insurance. Call and see how much Derek can save you today at 205-758-3391. And we're also brought to you by Strength Roofing and Siding. When severe weather strikes, your roof is your home's first line of defense. So call Strength Roofing and Siding at 205-858-9050 for your free roof inspection. My friend Zach Guffey will come out and inspect your roof. Make sure you're ready for this winter season. Give him a call today, 205-858-9050. So let's get right into it. Let's kick off the program with Caleb Sisk. Let's get to know the Tennessee Vols. We've been doing it all week long, looking at all their games, looking at their strengths, looking at their weaknesses, but now we will go inside Tennessee with the Tennessee Volunteers on SI writer Caleb Sisk. You can find him at Caleb Sisk _ Caleb, what's going on? How are we doing today, sir?
I'm doing good, man. How's it going?
Oh, very, very good. You excited for this big old game, third Saturday in October?
Oh, yeah. It's always a blast to see these two powerhouses and what has become a powerhouse for both teams. It's always fun to watch this rivalry game.
Absolutely. So let's get right into it. Tennessee 5-1, Alabama 5-1. Alabama an 8.5-point up favorite this coming weekend. Let's start with maybe the big picture for Tennessee. It jumped on top of Georgia, but Georgia came back and ultimately won that game in overtime. Tennessee winning its last two SEC contests, going on the road, beating Mississippi State in overtime, a big time drive to tie the game late in the ball game, and then going into overtime. And then able to kind of wrangle the Arkansas Razorbacks and beat them as well. What have been your overall thoughts on this season for the Tennessee Vols?
Yeah, I mean, the Tennessee Volunteers, man, it's a young team. This team is more so underclassmen, and that's been kind of the story of the season. You know, they have a lot of great defensive players. They have a lot of great offensive players, but they can't stay healthy either. So you see a lot of these young guys having to step up and having to step in bigger roles, which is something that, you know, we talked about during the offseason is they're very razor thin, at least we thought. And some of these younger guys, they're stepping up and doing their job. So, you know, you definitely have to work with these guys a little bit more than typical. But overall, I think this Tennessee team in general, they have done a great job. I think they're kind of on pace for what you would expect, especially for a team that's I've seen a statistic that came out that they're 49.5% freshmen. So this is a very young team. So mistakes are going to come with that young team, but at the same time, I think they limited the mistakes so far. 2 close wins in the SEC. That's something that can get by with certain teams and something that won't be able to get by with other teams. A very close loss against the Georgia Bulldogs in a game that was just a heartbreaker for the Tennessee Volunteers. So overall, I just think this team is in a good spot, both offensively and defensively. But at the same time, you know, they're going to have to step it up when they get into these bigger games.
Well, let's go in under center because a lot was made this offseason with the loss of Nico Iamaleava and then the addition of Joey Aguilar, basically the swap. What have you thought of Joey Aguilar? He is leading the conference in passing and really has been dialing up things pretty nicely for Tennessee. How have you thought Joey has played this season, and what is your expectations for him going up against the Alabama defense this Saturday?
You know, when you play a defense that's just historically great, like the Alabama Crimson Tide, and that's something that I've always knew growing up and everything, is just this Alabama defense. You know, it's just a step up when it comes to the defensive factor scheme and players that they have there. So Aguilar's going to have to do his job here. He's going to have to limit the mistakes, which is something that, you know, a big headline going into this season is, can Aguilar limit the mistakes that he was making at Appalachian State when he gets to Tennessee? So far, 5 interceptions. That's something that, you know, you look at and you're like, oh, that's not so great. But at the same time, when you look at how these interceptions happen, you can understand a few of them's just him trying to make a play. And that's something that, you know, when you look back at Nico Iamaleava, despite some of the good things that he did have, he was very cautious with certain passes that he was trying to make. But with Aguilar, this is something that, he's the polar opposite. He's a guy that you're going to have to tell him to, hold back just a little bit. Compared to Nico, he's a guy that you're like, okay, you got to let this thing go eventually. I definitely think from a standpoint watching this Tennessee team, I think Aguilar fits the system very well. I think he's doing his job. When you mentioned he leads the SEC in passing, and that says a lot, especially considering he's a guy that just jumped up in competition from Appalachian State. So I definitely think he's doing a great job, especially considering he's got a bunch of young guys around him. So he's a leader, and I think he needs to carry over that leadership mentality when it comes to traveling and playing on the road, especially at a place like, Alabama, which is always very hostile, especially when the Volunteers roll into town.
Let's go into the backfield right behind him or beside Joey Aguilar. You got Deshaun Bishop, Star Thomas, and Peyton Lewis. I watched the ball game against Arkansas this past Saturday, and Deshaun Bishop ended up taking kind of a tackle, looked like a hip drop tackle late in the game, and came out of the ball game. He's listed as probable for this week's game, leading the Volunteers in rushing. What do you think is going to happen? Is Bishop going to give it a go? Is he going to be able to play? And then if he can't play or if he can play, how does Star Thomas and Peyton Lewis kind of fit into this rushing puzzle?
And I think you touched on it right there too. You mentioned Star Thomas and Peyton Lewis. This whole trio has been very good considering the simple fact that they can stay more fresh than typical running back rooms. Darrell Sims has had this running back room at an all-time high, and that's been something that's been carried over. You look at a team like last year where they had Dylan Sampson, or, even before Dylan Sampson, you have guys like Jalen Wright or Jabari Small. So now you're looking at this running back room, and there's plenty of talent. But as for Deshaun Bishop, he had a career-high game against Arkansas, something to carry a lot of momentum over. He had 146 yards in that game rushing and on only 14 attempts. Math tells us, that's over 10 yards per carry. He's getting the first down every time he touches the football. So that was definitely something to be proud of if you're a Tennessee fan or a Tennessee coach, especially. He's probable for this game. If I was a betting man, I'd say he probably is good to go. The coaches seem very optimistic at the fact that he should be able to play in this one, and he's going to get a good bit of carries if I was to imagine, just simply based off the fact that he is arguably your best back on this team. Star Thomas hasn't really seen as many carries as he was towards the beginning of the season. That's something to pay attention to, because if Thomas gets out there and he does his job, I think you have to give the ball to the player who's on his best at that time, and that's something that Tennessee is starting to do more as the season progresses. Peyton Lewis stepped up huge once Bishop went down, and he had 2 touchdowns in the game-winning run, which was only 1 yard, but that was the biggest run of the game. It ices the game. It puts Arkansas hopes down, and that's exactly what you want when you want to win a football game. You got to do what it takes. And Peyton Lewis did a great job right there. But overall, this rushing attack, Tennessee wants to be able to run the football. They don't want to have to pass the ball every play or pass the ball on all these big downs. They want to be able to run the football. And, that opens up the offense overall. And, if they can run the ball very well, then Joey Aguilar will definitely like more of what he sees when it comes to passing.
When he does pass, the Tennessee Vols have great receivers and really led by Chris Brazil. And so I want to know kind of on the whole, what happened in the Arkansas game specifically that limited Chris Brazil? Only 1 catch, 5 yards against the Razorbacks. But Braylon Staley really stepped up in that contest, going over 100 yards. He took a little bit of a knock as well late in the game, it seemed like. But Brazil, Braylon Staley, and Mike Matthews, who are some of the guys that Joey Aguilar is going to be throwing to? And if you could, speak on Miles Kitselman and his impact on the offense, the Alabama transfer. He was the Tennessee representative up in the SEC media days. It seems like every time I put the tape on, he's getting some action. What's his impact been like? So what are the pass catchers going to bring to this game?
Yeah, I mean, just touching on those 4 guys in general, Brazel, he's a guy that was used and is used on the outside. He's been the veteran leadership in this wide receiver room. he wasn't as active when it comes to the Arkansas game. There was a lot of situations where he was double teamed. There was a lot of situations where he was just, put in his own little area, which just eventually opened up the slot receiver, which is, Braylon Staley right there. So Braylon Staley did a great job. I think that Braylon Staley could make a case for being the MVP of that game, just how much it opened up the pass game, especially for a guy like Miles Kitselman, who, he stepped up huge in that game. He's someone that you're going to get the best of both worlds when it comes to blocking and when it comes to receiving. I know at Alabama, he was a guy that, wasn't very flashy when it comes to the receiving game. That's something that kind of more so developed when he went to Tennessee. And he's quickly become a leader for this team, and I think he stepped up in a huge way. This is a situation where they're going to want to get him involved against the Alabama Crimson Tide, especially with blocking, because that defense is just very physical up front and something that the Tennessee Volunteers will look to, limit as they want to be able to win this physical battle. But, you got these younger guys, and Alabama's got a great group of guys, very disciplined on the defensive side. So a guy like Kitselman, almost seems like he has to step up just simply based off the fact that he is a leader. He is someone that's coming back for a final year. He's here for his final year. So this is definitely something where I could definitely see him being involved both, in the run game very heavily and also in the pass game just as a boundary to throw when it comes to short routes or anything of that nature. I don't think you're going to see Kitselman running deep on a streak, but at the same time, he may be a guy that, you need a quick pass on 3rd and 4. He may be a guy that you throw it to.
Well, Tennessee is tied for 8th in the country, only 4 sacks allowed the entire season. So nothing happens without the big men up front. We all remember the recruitment of David Sanders and the transferring of Lance Hurd a year ago from LSU. What does this offensive line bring to the game? And are there any injuries? I did see Jesse Perry kind of taking a small injury in the past game. Is he going to be okay for this matchup? What do you see in Tennessee's offensive line?
They've stepped up in a very huge way. I think for the most part, they kept Aguilar and have kept Aguilar's jersey clean, which has been very huge. It's limited any type of fumbles or anything of that nature. You've seen how they reacted, especially with a guy like Bishop getting a bunch of big carries and, obviously pushing forward with Peyton Lewis to win that football game. They've been the quiet bunch that, maybe not a lot of people are talking about, but at the same time, I think they've done their job very well. I think a lot of people would agree and say they've done their job very well. Jesse Perry has been a huge addition to this Tennessee offensive line. I anticipate him to be ready to go. I don't think he was on the injury report. So I do think he's ready to go. David Sanders has had his number called multiple times. He's stepped up in a huge way since coming back from injury. He was injured for quite some time, made his debut a couple weeks ago, which is huge for the Tennessee Volunteers, especially with anything that they, any type of subs that they need to make and stuff, even if he isn't rolling out there in the first team, you got to expect him to roll out there and do some big things. He's been very impressive, and he's definitely earned more reps, and so has Jesse Perry at the same time. So it's been kind of hard to get both of those guys on the field with Lance Hurd out there, but you got to think the future of this offensive line is very bright with those two guys.
We're hanging out with Caleb Sisk. He's the one of the writers for the Vols on SI Network, and you can follow him at Caleb Sisk _. You can read him, just type in Vols on SI as part of the on SI Network. Caleb, I really appreciate you hanging out with us today. Let's flip it to the other side of the ball, the defensive side of the ball, which has had a lot of question marks under Tim Banks. You're generating the most sacks in the SEC, but the Tennessee Vols are last in passing yards allowed. Kind of middle of the pack in rushing yards allowed, really, really suspect defense in some areas, but a lot of havoc plays as well. You saw him get 2 defensive touchdowns against Mississippi State and really, forced 3 or 4 turnovers against the Arkansas Razorbacks. So what's really been the story of this Tennessee defense? Really got torched against Georgia, made some adjustments. What have you seen covering Tennessee this season?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing to talk about is this is a very young core, once again, back in the defensive back room when it comes to the secondary. You got a bunch of new faces when it comes to starters. You're missing arguably your best defensive player in Jamon McCoy. He's out for this one, and you're also missing your secondary, I would say your second best cornerback and Ricky Gibson, he's also out in this one. So typically you're going to have to roll some new guys out there. You're rolling out a first-round projected draft pick who was set to be the backup to those two guys with Colton Hood, and then you're rolling out Ty Redmond. So them two guys have really stepped up in a major way, especially considering, they've had to step up in a bigger role than what they were anticipating, and they've been very impressive. Unfortunately for this Tennessee defense, they have given up a lot of different big type of plays or just chunk plays, turning plays into something. And, that's not typical of this Tennessee defense, especially when you look at the past 2 seasons, which have had a great defense and almost kind of, I guess you could say, a little bit different considering the fact that, you got a guy like Josh Heupel at head coach. You would think that this is an offensive team, and this year it is. But the past 2 seasons prior to this one, you got to look at the fact that it was a defensive heavy team. So now that you have these injuries, things have been a little bit shaky, but at the same time, there's still some things to like. You got David Hobbs back against Arkansas. He came up huge. He's going to be a huge factor in this one. You got one of the best edge rushers in the country with Joshua Josephs. And then you got guys behind him like Caleb Herring or Jordan Ross who have stepped up huge in their season so far. And this is one of the most dangerous edge rushing rosters that I've seen in quite some time from the Tennessee Volunteers. And that's a little bit of I guess a hot take, especially considering they just had James Pierce go in the NFL draft within the first round. So I would definitely say they're at their best when they're rushing the quarterback and getting to the quarterback when they're able to get home. But at the same time, you got to trust in your linebackers and you got to trust in your secondary to be able to make some plays. And they've made some plays, but they got to limit the mistakes at the same time. Very young core, so you got to expect it. But at the same time, when you talk about Alabama's wide receiver core, they're going to have a very tough time stopping that wide receiver core. So they just really got to limit the mistakes.
We're hanging out with Caleb Sisk, and really what I have seen, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the defense has kind of gone from, on the back end, a lot of man coverage, a lot of one-on-one stuff, to the last couple of weeks, Mississippi State, and particularly against Arkansas, a lot more zone coverage, a lot more cover 3 action, kind of zone blitzing, bringing havoc, trying to generate those pressures and generate those sacks. Do you think that that's an effort to kind of give the back end a little bit more of a chance? Or what have you seen as far as the adjustments or evolution of Tim Banks' defensive game plans this season?
Yeah, I think they've just really looked to bandage up some of the holes there that, maybe they have been able to see, because this team has definitely changed their presence a little bit on the defensive side. But at the same time, they're still going to run man. They're still going to go out there and trust in their guys to win one-on-one coverages and things of that nature. That's something that you would see a lot more of, especially if you have a guy like Jermon McCoy out there or Ricky Gibson out there. But with them guys not being available and both of them being out for this game, I would definitely anticipate them to run some zone coverage, but I would bet, especially considering Bernard's comments, that maybe they do roll out there in some man coverage and try to, go play some defense in what is considered by him the field of dreams. So we'll see how that definitely goes. That's definitely something that's bulletin board material. But at the same time, you got to trust in a coach like Willie Martinez, who's going to roll these guys out there and hope for the best when it comes to the secondary. But at the same time, yeah, if they're in some zone, that's definitely something that could work, especially when you got the edge rushers and the defensive linemen to be able to get back there anyways.
We're hanging out with Caleb Sisk from Vols on SI. Caleb, Tennessee hasn't won in Tuscaloosa since, I think, 2003. So let's put our coaching hat on, or ask you to put your coaching hat on. Tennessee wins this game for the first time since 2003 in Tuscaloosa if they do what?
I think if they keep their foot on Alabama's neck, really. I think if Tennessee jumps out to the lead, they cannot be, I don't want to say complacent, but I guess the right word would be conservative. You cannot continue to be conservative in certain situations. This is something that they need to avoid because, as mentioned, they won 2 close games in the SEC and they've lost a close game in the SEC. So all 3 of their SEC games have been close. This one very well could be close. I would bet that a lot of people think this one's going to be close. And with that being said, you got to take any lead that you get and any opportunity that you get to go score, you need to go score. Because until that clock runs out and, people are celebrating, that game is still in play. And this game can go anyway, and it can turn around very quickly. And this is something that we've seen covering this game for quite some time now. So, Tennessee's got to win this one if they want to be able to push their playoff hopes up even more. Regardless, if they lose, as long as they win out, you very well could see this team in the playoffs. But a huge win here would be huge for them, and any momentum that they want to have, especially considering the playoffs, which really wasn't a consideration for many when it comes to entering the season, just based off the amount of people that they lost to the transfer portal. But, as mentioned, playing in Tuscaloosa has been very haunting for this Tennessee team and Tennessee program. You definitely got to imagine they want this one, and I'm sure they come in here and try to fight with an edge, but we will see how things go. But I definitely think that if they get any type of momentum early, that they just need to stay on top of it. They can't afford any mistakes, and that's definitely something else to talk about. They got to limit the mistakes on offense, and that defensive back room, especially with the safeties and stuff. They can't allow anything over top, and they're going to have to go make some plays.
So, Caleb, on Football Friday, we usually do 3 players to watch. Now, they're always Alabama players, given it's the Joe Gaither show on Bama Central. But since you're on Friday, I'll ask you, what 3 players do you think that Tennessee has to watch for the Vols? What 3 players have to step up for Tennessee or have to have a big game? Or if you're writing, you are writing for the Vols on SI, who do you think has to be the subjects of your stories on Saturday night if Tennessee is going to be winning?
Yeah, see, that's very difficult. I think we touched on one. I think Miles Kitselman is probably the first player who comes to mind, just simply based off the fact that he is so important when it comes to running the football. He's so important when it comes to these short yardage gains that you need to just move the chains and things of that nature, especially in the red zone. He's such a good red zone tight end. That's something that I didn't have the chance to touch on really earlier. That I probably should have touched on. He's a guy that you can trust in the red zone very heavily. So I think he's definitely someone that needs to step up. Another player that really needs to step up in this one, and I think he very well could, is Jeremiah Thielander. He's been the kind of, I don't want to say shadow, but he's been I guess you could say the sidekick to Arian Carter. Arian Carter's getting a lot of the attention. He's been a very good middle linebacker for the Tennessee Volunteers. So I definitely think Jeremiah Thielander, if he steps up huge, and especially if he can step up in a way that, Arian Carter has within the past few weeks, I think Tennessee will be in a great position across the middle on that defensive side. And the last one that comes to mind, just simply based off the fact that he is not only used on the defensive side, but also in special teams and in returns, I got to go with Boo Carter. That's a guy that plays star for the Tennessee Volunteers. So he's going to have a tough task. Anything that they want to do on end arounds or anything that's running right at them, you got to ask them to make a play. If they're going to go short, you got to ask them to make a play. If they're going to target their slot, you got to ask them to make a play. And then, of course, if, Alabama's punting this football and gives Boo Carter the chance to return, he is a very dangerous return man. So I anticipate him to be a guy that's going to look to fight for those extra 2-3 yards just because it's going to help this Tennessee team. So those are 3 players that I really think could step up or should step up. Obviously, I feel like the easy answers would be like a guy like Brazel or a guy like Aguilar, but I think these 3 definitely need to step up.
I love it. That's exactly the spirit of Football Friday. Don't take the lowest hanging fruit. Take the most important answers. I love that. So, Caleb, we appreciate your time hanging out here, but everybody can go follow him at CalebSisk_. Make sure you read him on Vols on SI as Tennessee's coming to Tuscaloosa tomorrow night. We cannot wait for it. 6:30 right there in the stadium. You'll be able to see the Bama coverage on BamaCentral.com and the Tennessee coverage on Vols on SI. Caleb, thanks so much for your time, man. We really, really appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Anytime. Thank you.
Absolutely. And we're going to keep things rolling on the program with the rest of our Football Friday right after we tell you about Strength Roofing and Siding. Strength Roofing and Siding, Strength Roofing and Siding is backed by 45 years of expertise, tens of thousands of roof installs, and over 400 5-star customer reviews. Strength Roofing and Siding offers our customers the highest quality materials, fast install times, and market-leading extended warranties. Our Tuscaloosa roofing experts provide expert residential roof replacements and comprehensive repair services for homeowners across greater Tuscaloosa area and in Mississippi. You can call them today at 205-858-9050 to schedule your free inspection. Zach Guffey will come out and let you know what's going on with your roof and give you the peace of mind. We really appreciate Strength Roofing and Siding for sponsoring the program. We'll continue with Football Friday right after this.
Thanks for joining us on today's edition of the Joe Gaither Show on Bama Central. Keep up with Joe on all his social media pages at Joe Gaither6. Subscribe, rate, and review the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and be sure to read us daily at BamaCentral.com.